Cheryl. Glad to be here. Um, I am a literalist believer. I'm a temple worker, and for many years I've studied many things in esotericism and other subjects. When someone like me is confronted with narratives that are different, how does one come to a union of thought on the subject? When I was confronted with the ideas that the that there were so many things in Joseph Smith's environment that were instrumental in what he put together, it it didn't strike me as contradictory to the idea that everything that he did was by his gift of revelation that was in him. Because I see these things as, for example, in the Book of Mormon, where it talks about the Book of Mormon and the Bible coming together. When we have two different sets of knowledge that come together, they rub together. And initially, to some degree, there is that kind of, how do you bring these things together? How do you marry them together? In the book Mormon Scientist, it talks about Henry Eyring, who had this way of thinking that's kind of like Boolean logic, where most people sometimes think in a binary way and they say, is it this or is it that? Which one is it? What about if it's this and that instead? How do you bring those things together? I'd like to start out with some interesting things that I see, because as a literalist, I see the hand of God in everything that has happened here. People say that Jesus and his stepfather Joseph were carpenters. However, in Greek, the word used to describe them is tekton, meaning builders. Houses in Israel at that time were built out of stone and not wood. Jeffrey R. Chadwick, an archaeologist, says that they were stonemasons. In Hebrew, the word for builder is bone. Even Jesus's manger, where he was laid as a baby, was not made out of wood, but of limestone, as archaeology shows. It is fitting for our master to have been a stonemason. And in the Renaissance era, the remnants or relics of his ancient priesthood rites made their way into the craft of masonry, of all things, the very organization stemming from the craft that he had in life. He is the Grand Master of Masons, Jesus Christ himself. I see the fingerprint of God symbolically in this, and this historical thing came together by providence. I see these patterns all over the place. Jesus Christ cried out in his distress as his arms were in the position of distress on the cross, saying, my God, my God. Joseph Smith cried out at the time of his death with his hands raised in the position of distress from the window, saying, O Lord, my God. Joseph Smith and Jesus Christ at the time of their deaths were both sons of widows. Elijah, when raising the son of the widow, cried out to God, saying, O Lord my God, stretching himself upon the son of the widow and doing it 3 times. He raised this son of the widow from death on the points of fellowship. Elisha did the same to another boy, stretching himself upon him in the position of fellowship, mouth to mouth, eye to eye, hand to hand. The unio mystica, where the sacred embrace imparts power from the master to the initiate, raising him to life. Hiram Abiff was the son of the widow in Masonic myth, killed by fellow Masons. Joseph Smith, like Hiram Abiff, was slain by fellow Masons when his call of distress was given no heed by those who had sworn to give aid. Hiram Abiff was a Canaanite from Phoenicia. Weirdly, Joseph Smith was killed in Carthage, the name of a city in Illinois, named after the city in the ancient world built by Phoenicians. Joseph Smith is the embodiment, an instance in real life of the mythology of Hiram Abiff by the design of God. And many things in the life of Jesus Christ also manifest these mythological archetypes. In Isaiah 54:16, it reads, Behold, I have created the smith that bloweth the coals in the fire, and that bringeth forth an instrument for his work. Joseph Smith's last name is weirdly significant for the Western esoteric tradition. He is the smith, the artificer. Hiram Abiff of the 3rd degree Masonry was the artificer as well. Jesus Christ's leg was wounded by a nail hammered through it when he was in distress, and it was prophesied that the serpent would wound his leg, but that he would crush his head. Joseph Smith was also the man of the wounded leg. He limped because of the surgery on his leg when he was young. When Jacob was wrestling with the angel, he halted upon his thigh because his hip came out of joint, so he limped. This is a code word for circumambulation in a ritual. Similarly, the wrestling with the angel was a code word for the performance of the sacred embrace, the unio mystica. Anciently, the thigh was the constellation of the Big Dipper, Ursa Major, the constellation of circumambulation around the pole star. In some cultures, the pole star itself was known as the nail of heaven. To the Chinese, the Dipper was known as the nail constellation. The Taoists of China would dance or pace in a circumambulation in imitation of the Dipper. When a man limps, he can't easily walk in a straight line, but will tend to walk in a circular path if he does not constantly correct his course. When Abraham swore his servant to do his bidding, he said, "Put your hand under my thigh." Yet Joseph Smith in the JST changed it to be, "Put your hand under my hand." In other words, it was a hand clasp and didn't have anything literally to do with Abraham's thigh. The thigh was a ritual code word for the hand clasp, associated with the limping and the circumambulation of the Dipper around the pole star, like Masons circumambulating around an altar. Joseph Smith and his associates dug a long cave into a hill of the Palmyra area. Similarly, another cave was said to exist in the hill Cumorah, dug there long before by the ancient inhabitants, containing sacred records with great secrets. Some of those secrets would be revealed in a translation from a record on gold plates that came out of the earth. The masons of the Royal Arch were said to have gone into the subterranean vaults and found Enoch's gold plate, on which was found the name of God, the pronunciation of which was lost. And in 3rd degree Masonry, the Mason's word, the pronunciation was lost. The hand of God echoes throughout myth and history, and his handprint is left on history. What is it? Is it myth? Is it ritual? Or is it history? Where does the one begin and the other end? They are all intertwined, the one patterned after the other. They all come together in the one unified whole. For those that are aware of the evidence, it's undeniable that the LDS faith owes much of its heredity to parts of the Western esoteric tradition, such as Freemasonry and folk magic, and the homebrew religion of Joseph Smith's family. The favored explanation for many years in the church was that the endowment was created entirely by revelation. However, evidence demands a different approach, even if we count revelation as one of the elements involved. For believers, the evidence requires an approach that takes both naturalistic elements from the environment as well as revelation into account. Elder Jeffrey R. Holland stated, "The real voice of freedom and the grand setting, not for a reformation, but a restoration, came on this continent. God was working on the minds of many to make the circumstances right for a final restoration of the gospel, for one last effort to do even more completely and more finally that which had been done down through the ages." This is a significant statement for believers because it highlights the fact that many elements in Joseph Smith's environment actually got there by the hand of God in the first place, by the fact that God was working on the minds of many to set the stage. These people were like John the Baptist to set the stage for Jesus. Many of us have no realization that God is using us to fulfill his purposes day by day, preparing the way for different things to happen. And the same is so in the lives of those that prepared the way for Joseph Smith, sometimes unknowingly, those that put together ceremonies in the Western esoteric tradition and systemized systems that were employed by Joseph Smith as catalyst. The Book of Mormon is a revelation, as I say, on the true history, the true historical history of the people of the mounds and of the pre-classic Maya. I say these people were real, and I say that Moroni was real, and I say that the plates were real and they were real gold. I say Moroni was a real person. Many people think that the mound builder theory, where the 10 tribes had come to America to build those mounds, were just there environmentally and naturalistically for Joseph Smith to draw upon. Weirdly, I say that the mound builder myth was placed there in the minds of people deliberately by the Holy Ghost to prepare the way for Joseph Smith, to use it as catalyst, to prime his mind, to produce the revelation of the Book of Mormon, to produce the actual history of the people. Again, where does mythology and ritual and history start, and where does it end? They share the same pattern. Similarly, elements from the Western esoteric tradition and the environmental context and matrix of Joseph Smith's day were brought together by providence. The early Rosicrucians and Freemasons systemized those ceremonies from scattered pieces of mystical ceremonies that came down through different lines in Europe and that employed elements of Kabbalah, alchemy, and mystery plays from Catholicism, did so because the Holy Ghost was working on their minds to construct something that could be used as catalyst. They were preparers of the way for the revelation on the endowment. Many people say that Joseph Smith borrowed wholesale from Masonry. What if he did and it was the will of God for him to do so? Then what? Why is that a bad thing? Why should we think that it's a bad thing? What if what we have is the union of the new and the old? What if there are elements that are ancient and elements that are modern? Would it be a true hybrid, a true alchemical union, if it was not a new creation out of old metals? People forget that there would be no first vision without the catalyst of James 1:5, where Joseph Smith read that if any man lacks wisdom, let him ask of God. People forget that there would be no proxy temple ordinances without the catalyst of the words of Paul on baptism for the dead. People forget that there would be no Joseph Smith translation or a large portion of the Pearl of Great Price without the catalyst of the existing Bible text. In my view, this is the best way forward for believers, taking into account both the evidence that is before us, as well as having the ability to recognize the hand of God and the inspiration that brought together each stage of the development and preparation for Joseph Smith's crowning achievement of the creation of the endowment. Some have heard of Joseph Smith's Egyptian alphabet and grammar, or what is known among apologists as the Kirtland Egyptian papers. The evidence made plain by Hauglid and Jensen in the Joseph Smith papers shows that Joseph Smith was responsible for the content of those papers. He was mastermind. And he produced that by way of grammatomancy. There was no missing papyrus. And Joseph Smith connected with the minds of the ancients that used those symbols the way they used them in ancient times. I guess I'm coming to the point where I need to wrap up, but thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ed.